what I'm proposing is to repeal the current city ordinance 163.03 and 163.04. They deal with the Parks and Recreation, well, the Recreation Department, Recreation Board and Parks and Recreation Department. And as you will see, the later email that Mary Beth would have gotten would have actually put in the statutory sections and corrected some of the spelling and identified, for instance, there was an inconsistency in the first statute because it mentioned both the Parks and Recreation Board, but it actually sets up a Recreation Board. So I took out the Parks and just went with the Recreation Board. But you'll see that what I'm proposing, and I hope I can get a second to get this on the agenda, is that we finally put into a statutory form the exact duties, the best we can identify them, of that board. Also, whose authority they are to follow. And finally, in regards to the director, some guidelines as to what that director's position will be, what we would hope his minimum requirements would be in terms of hiring, what that director's authority will be, and finally that the budget would obviously be proposed, but approved by council, but administered by them. A significant change in what I'm proposing is that in the past, the director, Parks and Rec director, I believe would be ultimately a administrative function of the administration, although that's been in some question, I believe. But this clearly sets forth that while the Parks and Rec director would be appointed by the board, it'd be subject to the approval of the majority of the members of City Council, and this is a clear change from the previous statute in that it takes that authority away from the administration. It also gives a proposal which I think is needed for what happens when the rec board may decide that a current director should be removed. I frankly believe that when you have a department in the city that has its, number one, its own funding through the 0.3% tax, but also is collecting funds of more than a couple $1 million, that such decisions should not be made so easily. And since the city officials that are most often brought before the city electorate in terms of whether we continue our jobs or not by our performance are us, I believe that we should therefore be the ultimate deciders in that as well. So that if someone were removed, there would be a procedure by which they would then be able to come to council and seek some redress, and we would hear that. Finally, I believe that, again, because certainly when the original Recreation Board was determined back in 1995, some things I do not believe were perhaps as thought out as it should have been. And one of those things is the fact that clearly they weren't contemplating golf course at the time. Although there can be some argument, but it's fairly certain that historically it looks like they weren't. But I'm suggesting that a golf advisory committee of the Legends of Massillon Golf Club be set up that will assist in the monitoring, the suggestions to be made for that. I would also think that perhaps we can do the same for the recreation center, because I think the recreation center, as I've said repeatedly, is by far the worst of the two business entities being run from the, by the Recreation Board in terms of operations. And I think that an advisory committee for that probably wouldn't be ill-advised either. And neither of those advisory committees would have any power. All they do is make recommendations. But the purpose is that direct contact with those of the community that use the golf course and those of the community that use the recreation center, so that they get a regular feedback that's then passed on to the appropriate authority. But that's what I'm suggesting be done. So, I had not heard any input from anyone in the 6 weeks plus that I've been suggesting this, so I took it upon myself to create the piece of legislation, and I think I've identified clearly the significant changes that would occur if we were to pass these, if we were to repeal the current 16303 and 16304 and enact what I propose to be 16303 and 16304 and the two advisory committees. So, I don't know if any of you had the opportunity to look at these or not. The second email is one I took it upon myself after discussion with Mr. Sturgis about what needs to be repealed, what kind of language needs to be put in, how it should be organized. And the second email would have that in a much more organized fashion. And there were some, I'm not the greatest of typos, and spell check doesn't always pick up some errors, and I don't always pick them up anyway. So, comments? Mr. Lewis?
Yeah, I'm going to want to see the correct one, obviously, as soon as possible, so that we know what we're actually dealing with. And then also, we've looked at so many pieces of legislation, the different models and everything, and I can't recall, and it might have come through our hands at some point, have we ever looked at the actual ballot language that people check yes or no to? And does that give any indication as to what the consent may have been?
For the tax?
Yeah, with the tax. Does it talk about a board at all in that language? You know, what I don't want to do is if the actual ballot language kind of gives the appearance of a certain development or design, I don't want us to now change that, because that's what people voted on. So I just want to make sure we're being consistent.
Yeah, I honestly don't know that. I haven't seen the ballot. I have seen it, but I haven't seen it any time in close proximity to begin to tell you what that is. But I don't think that the ballot language would have addressed any of the issues that I've discussed here today. The main reason for me doing this is I have not seen the various activities that have gone on between the Recreation Board, the administration, the City Council over the past 5.5 years that I've been on City Council. There's so much wasted time, so much argument over where the power should or should not be, who has the authority to do or not do certain things. I think we need to legislate it one way or the other. I happen to think, and since I think that way, I prepared the legislation that way, that City Council should be the ultimate authority on that. This is a separate task. This should not be a political appointment by any administration. It should be something that is rationally thought out for the purposes of the best things for the recreation department and the parks of the city of Minster. As much as I like Mr. Strawn personally, I was at all times not in agreement with his appointment to that position, because I didn't think he would have qualified for the positions under him, let alone the position of the Parks and Rec Department. Correct? And I think that's an important thing that we have to set forth in the legislation. So, other comments? I mean, those of you that have gone to the meetings know how much time is wasted on these issues. Mr. Gansky?
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Slagle, for your effort. I've attended a lot of these meetings, and I do think it needed to be clarified.
taking credit for the a lot of the language I picked and choose from all the other ordinances you saw in the past that I had sent out. I mean, different cities did it different ways. I'm not saying that this is the right way or the wrong way, but I think it needs to be resolved one way or the other, and needs to be resolved in a fairly expeditious manner. Yes.
I don't remember the ballot language, but I remember how it was marketed and how it was sold to the people. And one thing I remember is they kept impressing on everybody. They would have the park board, the park board would be in charge because there would be no politics involved in this new park and rec department. And I think that's what the people voted for. And I've said many, many times in front of many people, I voted against it because I knew no matter what we did, there would be politics involved. And there has been. We've been through how many directors. I just don't think, I think we need to change, and I like everything that you've done there. I don't know if you noticed that the chairman of the park board's in the back, okay, I don't know if you saw him. That's all, I just want to make the comment.
Mrs. Del Rio Keller, did you have any comments that you wanted to bring to the attention of the council?
Good evening. Michelle Del Rio Keller, for those of you who don't know me. Currently, I am the chairman of the Parks and Rec Department. I am not here representing the board. I strictly am here because I knew this would be on the agenda tonight. From my perspective, I've been on the board about 4 to 5 years. Other than Mo Rickett, who's been on the board since 1995, I am actually the longest standing member. We've had lots of turnover on the board due to various reasons, health concerns, the time commitment, people's whose terms are up and they no longer choose to be on the board. Change is good, but as Mr. Slagle stated, we continually keep running into the same problem over and over and over. And everything that we do for the citizens of the community. We don't do it for political gain. We don't do it to make a point. We do it to represent the citizens that use our rec center, that use our golf course, and that use our parks. Preparing myself to come here over the last hour or so when I decided to come, I tried to think of a way that we're unique from other people. You know, if you have a police problem, you call the police. You don't have a choice. You can't call, Jackson to come. You have to call Maslin. You have a fire, you call Maslin. When you go to a park, when you go to a rec center, when you go to a golf course, you have a choice. And, I want to represent our community. I want to do the best job that we can do. We've got to let politics lie. They're there. I know they're going to be there. But when it comes to everyday decision making, it's just a constant tug of war. And I've had so many community members come up to me and citizens come up to me and say, what are we going to do and how are we going to move forward? And that's why I'm here tonight, is to plead to all of you. It lies in your hands. In 1995, this council, not all of you, but council did away with the current park board as it existed, and it made the park board what it is today. That was in 1995, long time ago. We didn't have a golf course back then. We were just building a rec center, or passing the tax to build a rec center. Lots of things have changed. It's just time that we look at the revised legislation and make it happen. I saw it today for the first time. Just like all of you, I did not know what it was going to say. Anything is better than what's there. Mr. Nist has been our interim director since the end of November. Before that, we had Mr. Strawn, who was in there, I think, a little less than a year. We've had a lot of turnover, and we've also had a lot of turnover with employees. So we just need to really take the bull by the horns, buckle down, and let's just move forward. And that's all, unless anyone has any questions. Thank you.
Paul.
Yeah, just, the reason I kind of agree with this, I've watched it for a long time, attended a lot of meetings, but we had this with the last administration. They can blame the mayor if they want. We have it with the current administration. They can blame the mayor whether or not they're right, but it just needs to be cleared up a little more. This may not be perfect, there may be other holes
like I say, you now have what I would suggest to be the changes. And the only thing the Recreation Center Committee is very similar in language. It just replaces the Legends of Massillon Golf with the rec center and puts in rec department users as well as golf users. But I think both of those facilities are so critical to the city, and the better they're operated, the more improvement we have and progress we have in those facilities, the better the city and thus the community will be in the future. And I think we really need to set that guideline down in stone and get the politics out of it. People say, well, there'll be politics if the council has approval. Well, someone has to have the approval. But it's a lot harder for politics to be played amongst 9 individuals than it is with one individual, as we all know. Even when politics isn't being played, it's a lot harder for people to say it was played when that happens. I mean, it's too easy to have a person to blame when there's only one person. 9 people, all of us that are elected every 2 years, will be held accountable. So that's why I proposed that. Very little to do with the previous, this administration, or anything in the past. It's just something I'm suggesting be done. I really want to get this on and moving this quickly.